My name is Reuven. I am now 14 years old and live in Shunem. My parents are Medad and Rina of Shunem. My mom told me that before I was born, there was the prophet of Yahweh named Elisha from Mount Carmel. He would walk through their village, Shunem, on his way to another town. She would watch out for the prophet Elisha and his servant coming from afar. The prophet would walk slowly and lean on his staff while he walked. My parents would invite the prophet Elisha and his servant into their house and give them bread and something to drink, and invite them to rest a while and talk to them. They could not rest too long, as the next town was still far away and they wanted to reach it before the sun sets. One day, the prophet Elisha and his servant came again, and when they left, my mom saw how tired the prophet was and how difficult he walked. She asked and urged my dad that they should make a place for the prophet and his servant to stay over for the night. He agreed to have a room built on top of the roof of their house. The room had stairs that led up from the bottom to the top room. They placed beds in the room, a table and a chair and a lamp. From the top of the house, it was easy to see when the prophet Elisha would be coming down the dusty road. One day, while my mom was standing in the upstairs room, she looked out of the window and saw the prophet and his servant coming down the dusty road. When they came to our house, my parents invited them in, gave them food, and invited them to stay overnight. The prophet was very thankful for the room that my parents had specially built for him. He wanted to give them something in return and offered them money. My parents did not want anything in return. But the prophet insisted, as he wanted to do something for them because they were so kind and generous towards him. The prophet's servant saw that my parents had no children, as I was not yet born. He then told my mom that he would pray to Yahweh to give her a son. My mom was very pleased about the news. A year later, after the prophet prayed to Yahweh to ask for a boy for my parents, I was born. My parents were so thankful and happy when I was born. They called me Reuven. My name means, "Look, a boy." I grew up and would watch out for the prophet when he would come down the dusty road. I was always happy to see him. When he would stay over, I would sit and listen to what he would tell me about all his travels over Israel. My dad would often go out to the reapers in the fields to oversee their work. When I turned 6, my dad allowed me to go with him to look at the harvest. One morning, I packed myself a lunch bag with bread and water and set out with my dad to the fields. I enjoyed picking up some of the leftover grains that fell from the bunches the reapers bound together. That day the sun was high up and the day was getting hotter and hotter. I was getting very hot and my head started to pain and throb. My eyes burned and I felt like I was burning up. I called out to my dad and that I'm very tired and my head is hurting. And then everything went dark. I do not remember what happened after that, but my parents told me that they took me home to my mom. For the rest of the day, my mom kept me close to her and kept wiping my head with cold water to cool me down. Then I died. My mom told me how she picked me up and laid me down in the bed of the prophet Elisha, up in the room where he always stayed overnight. She said she told my dad that she and her servant are taking the fastest donkeys to ride to see the prophet at Mount Carmel. My dad was surprised because they only went to see him on a Shabbat or with a new moon. My mom was in a hurry and chased the servant and the donkeys to go fast. As my mom and her servant were getting closer to the prophet's house, his servant Gehazi saw them and came to meet them. He inquired about my dad and about me, but my mom said nothing to him and continued on until she got to the prophet Elisha. As she bowed down to the prophet's feet and told him that I, Reuben, the boy he prayed for from Yahweh, has died, he looked at her. She believed that Yahweh would bring me back to life when the prophet would ask, Yahweh. The prophet told his servant to take his staff and rush to my mom's house and place the staff on top of me, which he did. When my mom and the prophet arrived later, I was still lying on his bed, and I had not awakened. The prophet came into his room and saw that I was very pale. My eyes were closed, and my hands and feet and my whole body were cold. He closed the door. Then he prayed to Yahweh and asked him what he must do to let me come to life again. Then he bent over me and lay down on my body, his mouth onto my mouth, his eyes onto my eyes, and his hands onto my hands. The prophet said, then I started to warm up, and he waited for me to get up. He walked up and down the room, waiting and waiting. Again he stretched himself over me. I sneezed 7 times. Achoo! 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 And then I opened my eyes. I was surprised to see the prophet next to me, and very glad that he was there. I could not remember anything that happened from the time I got that terrible headache until I woke up with the prophet standing next to my bed. The prophet told his servant to go and call my mom to tell her that I am alive, while he sat next to me on the chair talking to me. When my mom came into the room, she was very glad to see me alive again. She came over to me and hugged me and kissed my cheeks. She bent down on her knees in front of the prophet and thanked him and Yahweh for restoring life to me again. Then she took my hand and walked me over to my dad to greet him. My parents were so thankful to have me back alive, and I was also very thankful to Yahweh. As we were sitting on our porch at our house, we looked up to the sky and to the room of the prophet, and my mom said that she is so glad that my dad had that room built for the prophet. They thought that they showed kindness and gratitude towards the prophet, and it came back double to them when he prayed to Yahweh that my parents get a son, and when he prayed to Yahweh to bring me back to life. Then one day the prophet Elisha warned my mom of the famine, the drought that Yahweh will bring over Israel, and that it will last for 7 years. He told my mom that she and her family must leave to go and stay in another land. We left to stay in the land of the Philistines for 7 years while the drought was in Israel. When the drought was over, my mom went to the king of Israel to ask for her house and her land to be returned to her. The king asked Gehazi, the servant of the prophet Elisha, about all the miracles and wonderful things that the prophet had done. Gehazi told the king about me and my mom, and how the prophet prayed to Yahweh to bring me back to life, and I did come alive. Then the king asked my mom if it was true, and she confirmed it. The king then gave instruction to his general to give back our house and all the lands we had before we went to the land of Philistine. So the lesson we learned today from this story, that Reuben's parents were hospitable towards the prophet, meaning they showed kindness to the prophet of Yahweh when they built a room for him and shared their food and drink with him without expecting anything back. We also learned that Reuben's mom had great faith in Yahweh to heal her son, and that she showed gratitude to Yahweh when she bowed down to the prophet of Yahweh. Children, have a good day and a peaceful Shabbat, as the Shabbat will be coming around every week. Yom Tov v'Shabbat Shalom.